face close to the mic. This is being recorded. That goes to our panelists as well. We want to make sure that this can stay on the South Bay website in perpetuity. So if you forget something and you want to refer back to it, so we're all going to speak nice and loud and into our microphone so this can be recorded. All right, so since this is a panel on global real estate, how many of you have your CIPS designation? Fabulous, fabulous. So CIPS is Certified International Property Specialist, and it's a designation that is extremely helpful if you want to expand your global business. And let me pause for a moment and just say that global real estate transactions are not just representing someone overseas. It's foreigners buying here, you representing people overseas, but also our local, multicultural, and diverse communities in Southern California. So it's not just one or the other. So this is a designation that we can get, and it will connect you to a network of very professional, solid realtors all over the world. So who is interested in taking this class? All right, raise your hand high, and if you have a business card, please get it out. And we will contact you about the next CIPS. Ben?
I just want to mention that taking the class here, the way the schedule is set up and the price of it is better than you're going to find anywhere else. If you have any interest in doing it, normally it's 5 days in 1 week and you have to travel somewhere. Here they break it up 2 days 1 week, 2 days the next week, and 1 day the following week. So you're not out of the office 1 whole week. And the price is better than you're going to find anywhere.
Yes, you get a definite savings by doing it here at the board, but we need people to sign up. And I am very embarrassed to say that I don't have my complete certificate, so I will join you. I will be there with you. And David, you have my card. So these are out front if you don't have them on your table, but have a look and be a part of this global community of realtors. We're still waiting on Michelle from RPM, but we're going to get started anyway with introductions. So you guys all know I'm Allison Clay Duboff, Remax Estate Properties in Manhattan Beach, and I'm going to start introducing they'll introduce themselves. Our panelists, Carl Shusterman.
Good morning. Yeah, those of you who've maybe been members 5 or 10 years or more, you may have seen me. I think a few years ago, you guys probably thought I passed away or something, but I'm still around, so so I am back. I went to UCLA. I'm a LA guy, born in LA, die in LA. Went to UCLA Law School. Ended up just by a series of coincidences becoming an immigration lawyer back in the 70s. I worked for the government for about 6 years, and then I went off, joined a big firm, and then in the early 80s started my own practice. We have 8 attorneys in downtown LA, and we talk to, I think we do about every type of immigration, from EB-5s, which are the $1 million investors, down to people who are in deportation hearings before immigration judges downtown. And we have a couple lawyers who specialize in each field, because it's, immigration may sound like a very narrow area, but there are other narrow areas in immigration. So a couple attorneys do deportation, a couple do family law, a couple do employment-related immigration, and some do investors immigration. And the guy's talking to you right now is the dilettante. I know a little bit of each, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert on any one of them, but I do have attorneys in my firm that join me on these consultations. I was talking to a couple people in the audience about representing people in foreign countries and so on. And if any of you haven't figured this out now, I think I'm the last one to figure it out. But I have a couple 21-year-old assistants at the front desk, and they said, you know what, Carl, you really should do Skype consultations, I said, Skype, I don't think that's going to work, and they'll cut off in the middle and everything. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been talking to people, whether they're in Singapore or London or, Lagos or, anywhere in the world. And I notice we keep track, the retention rate of those people is higher for me than the people who come into my office. And I think the reason is when you're there, they're not all dressed up. They didn't just drive in and look for a parking space, and they're nervous and everything. They're just sitting at home, and their kids are jumping into their lap, and you go, oh my God, how old is she? She's so cute, you know. And by the end of the half hour, we're kind of friends with each other. And so I thank my 21-year-old assistants. Thank you.
And Carl is just such a wealth of information and stories, and he has regaled us on many occasions of stories that you won't believe, some with happy endings, some not with happy endings. But, you know, call upon him. He is a treasure trove.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, but one other thing, because I'll forget later, but Sabine has, you know, immigration law, if you haven't, you know, read the news or whatever station you listen to, is whatever I'm going to tell you is hopefully correct as of today. But tomorrow, yeah, like the Supreme Court's hearing the travel ban case right now as we're sitting here talking. And things are changing by the day, by the week, by the month. So 23 years ago, I started a free email newsletter. We have about 60,000 people around the world who subscribe. And all I can tell you is it's worth the price. It's free. So she's gonna pass around some sign-up sheets if you want. Just hopefully there's no doctors in the room. Just do it so my assistants can read your email. Thank you.
And this is something to share with your clients that will show that you are on the cutting edge of what's going on in a very fluid situation. So I would definitely recommend that you sign up and share some of the information with your clients. And now we will move on to Debbie. Debbie?
I'm sorry. I called you Michelle. You kept saying Michelle.
Well, because she's not here yet.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Sorry, Debbie.
Debbie, who is our escrow officer today.
I don't know if I'm on or not. Hi, I'm Debbie. Yes, I'm on. With Concierge Escrow. We're located in Hermosa Beach. Been in escrow since 1986.
That's a long
escrow. Yeah. Yeah, we're making interest. So I'm here to discuss some of the things about how international buyers, how we have certain requirements and what we have to deal with, like going to the American Embassy if anything has been notarized, or doing SWIFT international wires, because we're not, I know we're going to discuss, I think, about Bitcoin when she gets here. And that's something that's not in escrow yet, so that's something you guys have to work on. So, am I off now?
Yeah, I think
Hello? So, okay, so that's basically, I'm just going to go over the escrow stuff today about how we deal with international buyers and sellers.
All right, well, I'm going to get started with some questions since Michelle's not here yet, and I guess I'll save the Bitcoin because I think everybody's going to be very interested in hearing about Bitcoin. So let's start. I'm going to ask the question generally, and both of you can just pipe in however you'd like to. There she is. Michelle. Right in the nick of time. Please introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Michelle Mollura, and I'm with RPM Mortgage, and I've been a mortgage lender for, this is going on my 18th year in the industry here in the South Bay, so I'm happy to be here.
All right, take a breath while I ask the very first question of our panelists. What do we need as real estate practitioners to be asking or advising our clients about international buyers?
Go ahead. Okay. Well, you know, obviously, despite what you may have heard in the press, you can't just show up in the United States and stay here legally. You might be able to, if you're from certain countries in Europe or Japan, you might be able to come here as a visitor without a visa, but you still have to fill out some stuff online to do that. So you need to make them aware that they probably are going to need some kind of temporary visa to work in the United States, and even that's going to run out, so they're probably going to need to apply for a green card.
I would ask them about how they're going to hold title, because that makes a difference on what the sales price is going to be. If it's over the $2 million cash and you're going to be taking title in an LLC corporation, there's requirements now that the title company has and the escrow company in order to verify the deposits and so forth, because now they're trying to make sure people aren't laundering money through escrow now. So we have more requirements. So I would make sure that, ask them how they're going to hold title. Individual buyers, there's not requirements on that. But when they turn around and sell, they need to have a Social Security number, because otherwise we can't close an escrow until they have a Social Security number to have all the lovely withholdings for the Franchise Tax Board and the IRS.
Also, questions and answers. We're going to write them down, and then we will ask them at the end if we find it to be easier that way. But do write them down so you don't forget. But I will have questions to propagate more answers.
So what I would say is two things that are really important in your conversation with foreigners is if they're here with a visa and what kind of a visa they're here on, number one. And number two, how and where are they earning their income? Because if a person is here as a legal resident and they're earning income in the United States and they've filed 2 years of tax returns in the U.S., they're pretty much like a regular borrower. They end up being like anybody else, like you and I. But if their income is earned overseas and stuff like that, then that starts putting them into the foreign borrower category. The other thing I would say is it's important to, if you're dealing with somebody from overseas, you might just want to Google their name and find out a little bit about them. We do have countries that we have sanctions against that money cannot come from. So you kind of want to know those things up front. We had a situation once where if the realtor would have just Googled the client's name, they would have found out they were like wanted by the law in their home country and they were like a cartel, person. So sometimes you can find out some simple stuff just from getting to know your client a little better, maybe Googling their name. Yeah.
You should do that for all clients. And then further to that, can you talk about the wire fraud wire list that you are aware of, certain countries and certain wires that are red flagged?
Yeah, so OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control, they have a list of countries that we have sanctions against. So most recently when I looked it up, Belarus, Burma, Central Africa, Cuba, Liberia, Libya, North Korea, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Iran, although there's an asterisk next to Iran because there are some exceptions. If you are a naturalized citizen in the U.S. With background from Iran, we can sometimes do loans for you as long as none of your income or assets are tied to Iran. So, yeah, so there are countries where the money just cannot come from, period. And then it goes beyond that. They're going to season where the money originated from if it hasn't been in the foreign bank account for a long time. So we had a client once where the money was coming from a country that was okay, but then when it was seasoned further back, it originated from a country that was on our sanction list. So, we couldn't do that deal. So
how do we get a list of the sanctioned countries that we need to have as a sort of a red flag alert? So if we get a call, usually sometimes these outside investors, they will call or they will email, and it's kind of challenging to open up a good dialogue. So where could we find that list?
I mean, I can give you the list I have, and you can just Google, OFAC and see what is, on the most recent list that they're publicizing to the general public, I would say. That's one thing you have to look at for sure.
Did you say what OFAC stands for?
Yeah, Office of Foreign Assets Control.
Thank you.
And then back to your original, the wiring thing, all money has to come through a wire. because it makes the money go through the Federal Reserve, and then they can season, you know, its origination and all that stuff. So we require money to come through a wire, even though I have been told that now there's some new, what do they call it? I'll look it up, but there's some ACH wire now that exists, that you can go from one country to another, but as far as I know, they're only really using that in business transactions and not in real estate transactions. So I think we're still holding to a traditional wire.
And let's go back towards the beginning of a transaction and trying to get somebody qualified. How can we overcome the lack of a U.S. credit report, and what can take its place?
So I think that's a question for me. So a lot of countries actually have credit reports. They have a similar system that we have in the U.S., like Canada, Australia. So we have the ability here to pull an international credit report. I don't know every country that has them. A lot of the English-speaking countries have something similar. But if they do not have a traditional credit reporting system in their country, we just require it just changed down to 2. It used to be 4. We just require 2 alternative trade lines. So that can be them showing us a banking relationship they've had for at least 12 months, utilities, a mortgage, rent in their home country, something where they can show us 12 months history with a trade line of some sort will be acceptable in lieu of a credit report.
Thank you. Did everybody take note of that? Because that's one of the most commonly asked questions that I get is about the credit report. I don't want to jump around too much, so let's just stick with the finance side for now, and also transactionally. What is, Debbie, the most common mistake by realtors when they're representing someone from overseas that you see? No?
I've seen a few of them because of the fact that they have their vesting is in an LLC or a trust or a corporation, and they have to go to the American Embassy, so they just want to do a power of attorney, and power of attorneys do not work on LLCs or corporations, and majority of the time they don't work on trusts. So you have to have the member of the LLC or the president of the corporation have to sign, or the trustee. That's majority of the time. They're trying to make it easier for somebody here to sign versus the one overseas. So power of attorneys do not work if you're in a entity vesting, but individually it does work.
What is the typical down payment for a foreign buyer? Is it the same? Or what is the statistically average down payment?
I would say average 35% down if they're buying as a second home. If they're having to buy it as an investment property, then it's 40% down. And I would say, back to that, we do not allow power of attorney on loan documents on foreign borrowers either. So just like it's an issue for escrow, it's also a bank issue. And I would just add the biggest mistake I would say I see is not setting proper expectations with your clients. These are not clients that necessarily things can move quickly like we're used to on typical transactions. A lot of times we have to have documents translated. They have to hire translation companies. We have to have bank accounts translated. We sometimes have to get letters from business people in their foreign country, like their CPA, if they don't have tax returns like we do in the U.S. Like China, for example, doesn't have tax returns, but we're able to pull a CPA letter from their accountant in China. There's just other things that go into transactions, and what I find is a lot of times realtors will talk to their foreign borrowers as if they're U.S. borrowers. And so they'll give them very tight time frames. They'll talk about the down payments and interest rates that apply to U.S. borrowers. And so now they've set all these expectations that aren't realistic. So I would say that's probably the biggest mistake I see.
And Carl, do you have, in your experience, a list of resources for translation services? Because I'm sure that there are some that are good and some that are not good.
Actually, I do not have translation services. In our office, though, we do have people who speak Chinese, Spanish, Farsi, Hindi, so Filipino, Tagalog. So But yes, I'm constantly bombarded by the translators, but I don't have a list. Yeah.
Okay. That would be a very beneficial thing, I believe,
Yeah, if
for
somebody,
us.
some of these things, like which countries are on this particular list, or the translators, if I could be provided with that, I'd be happy to put it on our website in our newsletter so people can just click and get that list right away.
I do have something on death certificates for, say, Japan. I've had it, and you have to get a court-approved translator for the death certificate. So that's something you have. There's a list. You can probably Google it.
Right. I guess everything we can Google now. So, but I think to have to be very cautious on which translation services you use is, fundamentally important, because you don't understand the language, and so you're just blindly trusting. So I would maybe check out to see if there's some sort of accreditation with the different translation services, or call the UN. Let's talk about currency conversion, because that is something that can really impact your clients when they are converting money. Who would like to start with that?
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
We don't really take it upon ourselves to know what the laws are in other countries as far as how fast money can move from that country to the U.S. So what we typically do is we just Google on the day we're submitting the file what the conversion rate is, so that we can show the underwriter something in writing that basically says, this is the equivalent in U.S. dollars. But in the U.S., we're always dealing in U.S. dollars to transact real estate. So whatever they're using has to be converted to U.S. dollars. And really it's up to, I guess, your client to understand the banking laws in the country they're bringing the money in from, to know how long that's going to take them. That's not something that we really know.
And Debbie, in your experience, would you say that you have seen escrows that are delayed because the borrower wants to wait for the rates to change, or how that impacts?
I haven't.
You have not, okay. And any concerns or questions that have come up during escrow?
No, usually it's just an international transfer, a wire. Everything has to be by wire transfer, and you get the SWIFT code. It's on all escrow and has the wire instructions, and it has the SWIFT code for all international wires.
So let's just hopefully assume that we have a wonderful transaction completed. How are global referral fees handled? So that's, hopefully we can get some answers on that. Do you know anything about that, Debbie?
So the thing on that is, it depends on what the referral fee is for. We're paying John Smith. We don't issue 1099s on anybody but the seller. So if the seller's looking for a write-off, or a buyer's looking for a write-off, for escrow to issue a 1099 for a referral fee, we cannot issue that. We don't issue just random 1099s, as we don't issue 1099s for commissions.
And what about restrictions on realtors receiving a gift?
Are you looking at me?
I'm looking to all of you.
Yeah. I don't have anything to comment on that. We don't. That doesn't really come into play. For us, we just follow whatever the contract says of who's getting what, and we follow the RPA. So
I'm thinking a post-closing gift, and an expensive gift from a foreign buyer as a closing gift. How is that reported? How do you deal with that? Have you ever come across that?
Receiving on the receiving end?
Receiving
well,
it.
I wish I could say I have received an
more for the realtor.
gift.
And I guess what I'm trying to put out there is from a money laundering standpoint.
Oh, God.
So you sell a $2 or $3 or $4 million property in Palos Verdes, and your foreign buyer wants to give you a monetary gift or a Ferrari or something. How is that handled, and has anybody on our little panel here ever experienced that? Well, I think that's something that we do need to talk about, because I think we're all aware that even our client closing gifts here have a monetary cap, which probably most of us, I hate to say, I think it's $25.
Yeah.
I believe legally it's $25. Yes? Anyway, so, okay, imagine selling a $5 million property and you give someone a $25 gift card. Anyway, I'm not advocating to do anything that's not appropriate. I'm just saying.
That's what you can write off. That doesn't mean legally that's all you can give.
I think there's some things around that as well. But anyway, yes, we need a tax person. Okay, let's see. Have we gone over really what costs and steps are involved to get residency? I don't think so. You want to take that over? So you have a client, you get an inquiry, someone wants to buy property here, but they want to go through the steps to establish residency.
Okay, so to become a permanent resident of the United States, our system, in my opinion, is quite outmoded, but here's what the system is. The great majority of people get their green cards or their permanent residence through family members. Maybe 200,000 or 300,000 a year marry U.S. citizens. There's no quota on that. And the others get it through brothers, sisters, parents, all of that type of stuff. But there are quotas. There are overall quotas, and there are per country quotas. So, for instance, my wife is from the Philippines, and when she became a citizen in the 70s, she applied for her brothers and sisters. But anybody want to take a guess about how long it takes a brother or sister to come up from the Philippines? Sir?
I don't know if it's specific to Philippines, but the sister thing, I think the last time I looked at it was around like 12 years.
Okay, yeah, he said 12 years. It's mostly gone up to about 13 years. But because there's country quotas, Philippines is 24 years. And guess what? I had a case. There's something called the Child Status Protection Act, because you can imagine if it takes 24 years to get your brother or sister over here, what if I apply for you as my sister and the next year you have a baby in Manila? Does that baby get to come with you 24 years later? Usually the rule is once the kid turns 21, he's not coming with the parents anymore. So in 2002, Congress established something called the Child Status Protection Law, but it's kind of a Las Vegas crap system about, how you can get in. Depending on not how long the wait is, but how long the petition that you initially send to the Immigration Service is pending, which could be a day, it could be a year, it could be 10 years, just total luck. That is subtracted from the kid's age when the mom and dad are ready to come over to the U.S. So my ex-bosses, my ex-employer, the Immigration Service, Congress passes a law, and then they put the most restrictive interpretation in the regulations that you can possibly imagine. And I've gone to court many times challenging them and usually have won. But we had this case under the Child Status Protection Act a few years ago. We lost it in the district court. We lost it at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals 3-0 unanimously. I was sailing down the Danube with my wife, listening to the oral arguments. And I found out that a court in Texas in the Fifth Circuit ruled 3-0 the other way, our way. So when I got back, myself and one of my lawyers, we did a petition to the Ninth Circuit to hear it en banc, which means 11 judges. And I said, I'm going to argue it myself this time. So I went and argued before these judges, and we just had we had a reversal, but 6-5. I mean, the closest thing you could have imagined. And that was right after the 2012 election, and I don't want to get too partisan, but because Obama would not have won it without votes from Hispanics and Asians in that election. So I got my friends on the Hispanic caucus to meet with Eric Holder, who was then Attorney General, to say, the Ninth Circuit has decided this. Let's let it be for the whole country. Let's not go to the Supreme Court. But I guess people inside the Justice Department had a little more say about that than yours truly. So went to the Supreme Court. I was too nervous. I picked an attorney who used to be a clerk for one of the Supreme Court justices, and I sat next to him while he argued it. I thought he did a great job, and we lost it 5-4. So So what it means is you can wait 24 years and, yeah, you can come over as my sister, but you have to leave that kid behind. So naturally, most of my wife's relatives did not come to the U.S. They're up in Vancouver, Canada, because their immigration laws are, in my opinion, a little more realistic. So, yeah, I know I'm talking too much, but that's my finally a question I know something about. So I just want to point out that it's mostly family-based, our immigration system. In a smaller part, maybe 15% is employment-based, so people are being sponsored through their employers in the U.S., and then 10,000 people a year are able to come on the EB-5 program, which is they're either invested $1 million or usually it's $500,000. They can start their own business, but it's usually in a U.S. company, which is called a regional center. There's over 800 of these. And if you have clients that are going to go for the EB-5, I would encourage them to do it now, because probably on October 1st, that 500,000 is going to move up to somewhere around 850,000.
Can you touch a little bit more now upon the EB-5? And how many calls do you get into your office that someone wants to buy property and wants to also get an EB-5 visa?
Yes.
Does it run concurrently?
Yeah, so they're not going to be able to get an EB-5 by buying a house or probably even a commercial property. They are going to have a business where they employ at least 10 full-time American workers to do that. It's $1 million, and it's been that way since the early 90s. About every 3 months, we think they're going to change it. They have these temporary funding bills where they put that provision there, and they haven't changed the amount, but I think it's pretty certain by October 1st they will change the amount. So it's $1 million, and with two exceptions, and the two exceptions are the ones used by investors 99% of the time. Number one, if you invest in a rural area outside a municipality of 20,000 or more, then you can get by on 500,000. Or if you invest in a high unemployment area, an area where the unemployment rate is at least 50% more than the national average, which
50%?
Yes. Wow. Yeah. So, you know, the national average is about 4.1, I understand, and so that would be about 6.3%. But these districts are very, very gerrymandered, you know, just like congressional districts. So when my office is in downtown LA on like the last building on Wilshire Boulevard on Wilshire and Grand, and when people are in my office and they look at the buildings and there's crane, if you haven't seen it, there's cranes all over downtown LA with these high rises. Almost every one of those is an EB-5 project. And it's not because downtown LA everybody's, I mean, we do have homeless people, but it's not like our unemployment rate is over 6%. So what they do is they've gerrymandered it, so it's from South Central LA up Figueroa to downtown LA, and that's all considered a district. My prediction, because I've listened to these congressional hearings with Senator Grassley and Senator Durbin, this is like one issue where there's actually bipartisan support, believe it or not. They are going to have federal government draw the districts in the next law, and they won't be able to gerrymander. So I think most of the people, instead of the 500,000, which is going to go up to 850,000, will be on the more expensive side. So it will be maybe $1.2 million, $1.3 million, something like that, that they'll have to invest. And I think most of them will do it in the regional centers. One other thing about the EB-5 program, 88% of the people who've applied over the last 20 years have been from one country, People's Republic of China. But remember, I said there's a 7% maximum quota. So now that it used to be that program wasn't used too much until about 6 or 7 years ago. One of my attorneys actually went to Washington. They passed a bill, and he wrote the regulations. And that's what created the regional center program. That wasn't part of the original legislation. So the regional center program has pretty much taken over EB-5. So I would say over 95% of the people don't start their own businesses, even though it's possible. We do have a few clients who have started their own businesses, but they invest in the EB-5 program. But China is now 3 or 4 year backlog. And as of next week, May 1st, the second country, Vietnam, which accounts for 3%, will be 3 or 4 years backlog. So from those countries, I wouldn't advise people to go into EB-5, but if you have clients that are not from Vietnam or China, and they have the money, it's a very good program to get a green card.
What would be the most advantageous of a few countries that you could name for the EB-5?
Well, there are not a lot of people applying for EB-5 from any other countries except Vietnam or China. So, I mean, we have people from India, we have people from European countries, we have people from Japan applying for it. But it really doesn't matter. As long as it's not one of the 2 backlog countries, they can apply. What they need to understand, though, is immigration will just go crazy tracing the source of the funds. There's one issue I want to stress. Congress passed EB-5 in 1990 by a very, very narrow margin. People like Dianne Feinstein and so on were totally against it. They said, it's like American citizenship is for sale now. It's actually a green card, but still. The proponents were saying, but look, they're creating all these jobs for Americans, and it passed, I think, 52 to 47. Very, very, very close margin, wasn't used very much, and then a few years ago, because of the regional center program, a lot of people started investing in EB-5. But what they'll do is they'll say, the reason that they are so crazy about tracing the source of funds is that a lot of people to oppose it were saying, Colombian drug dealers are going to take their money and buy green cards. I mean, is that what we want to have in the U.S.? So it's not just Colombian drug dealers. No matter who your client is, they're going to have to say, oh, well, where did you get the money? Oh, from my bank account. Oh, and before you put it in the bank account, where did you get the money? And they'll go back about 10 years. I think this gentleman, did you have a question?
On that EB-5, if I have a client that wants to come in, can they bring their entire family, and how long does the EB-5 process take?
Okay, so yes, so anybody, or almost anybody immigrating, certainly people on the EB-5 program, it's husband, wife, and kids under 21 and unmarried. They can bring the family together. A good question about the timing. So they can file a petition. It's called an I-526 form. But immigration is taking about a year to decide those forms. And only after that petition is approved can they go to the embassy in their country and apply for the green card. And that's a comparatively fast process, a couple months or something. But one thing, they get a 2-year green card, and then 90 days before the end of the 2 years, they have to show that they still have the money invested and they still have created 10 jobs, or else they won't be able to stay. Yes?
Do they have to be U.S. citizens that are employed, or can it be other foreign?
Yeah, a good question. So they call it U.S. workers. So technically it's U.S. citizens, permanent residents, green card holders, asylees, or refugees. Yeah.
And let's try to keep our questions to the end so we can, and we're getting close to the full question time, if that's okay. So speaking about sourcing funds, this is a topic that I know that we're all interested in. Bitcoin. So let's talk in all of our different industries, who has had experience with Bitcoin? Michelle.
Well, at RPM, I know of one transaction that we've closed where the funds were sourced originally from Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, the way I try to explain it to realtors is think of it as foreign currency. It's no different than if somebody's bringing money in from China or Australia. It has to be converted to US dollars in order to be used in a real estate transaction. The big trick with Bitcoin is the sourcing of the funds, because the Patriot Act, after 9/11, the government, one of the things is they source all the money that comes into the U.S. to buy real estate, to start businesses. They want to make sure that they're not being funded, by a terrorist group or illegal people doing bad things. So it's the same with the Bitcoin. So they will look to see where the money came from that was invested into the Bitcoin. So our client, for example, that we closed, he sold a business in Australia, and he invested part of his proceeds of that sale in investing in Bitcoin. So we were able to source the original source of that money that was then converted to Bitcoin, and we were then able to have him convert the Bitcoin to US dollars, and then that money was able to be used in his real estate transaction. One thing, though, is the Bitcoin account, the tricky part is being able to season the money to show bank statements, because there really don't exist bank statements in the Bitcoin world. But we did find a way to create a ledger that satisfied underwriting, that we could show everything that had transpired over 60 days in this Bitcoin account. So that's how we were able to get the transaction closed, but it was very, very tricky.
How long did it take, start to finish?
It wasn't that long. I think we closed it in like 45 days. But one thing that's important to know, if you're talking to people that have Bitcoin accounts and they're wanting to use the money, all of the Bitcoin has to be seasoned from money that was theirs prior to it becoming Bitcoin. And what I mean by that is a lot of people are mining for Bitcoin, where it's like found Bitcoin. They mine it in the internet. So there can be no commingling of mined Bitcoin. So if somebody had an account and they invested $100,000 of money they had in a regular bank into Bitcoin, and then they mined 5 Bitcoins that they found on the internet somehow. I don't even know how you do that, but I guess there's a way you can find abandoned Bitcoin on the internet. So if there's any mined Bitcoin that was commingled into that account, that whole account it cannot be used now.
And how do you determine, how can you see that it's...
Because they will trace every conversion into the Bitcoin. You have to source where it started from before it was Bitcoin. So if you can't source every bit of it from a prior account you had, and let's just say you had an account with Bank of America, if you can't show that 100% of it was purchased from seasoned money you had that was yours, then it's an ineligible account now.
And could I ask the purchase price and how much of those funds had been Bitcoin conversions?
It was, I think the purchase price was like $1.5 million, and it went through conventional financing. We actually closed the deal. The servicing ended up with Wells Fargo in the end, although I don't think Wells Fargo would have done the deal through a retail office. Like, we really, we had to really figure out how to get our underwriter, because we're fully delegated, to accept this ledger of the Bitcoin money. But yeah, it was the whole down payment came from it.
The entire down payment?
Yeah, the entire down payment.
Which was 20%?
Yeah, but it was converted to US dollars, but originated from a Bitcoin account.
Fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating. Carl, have you had any experience? No? Nada. Okay. Debbie? Okay. How many people here would like to have a class on Bitcoin? Okay. Duly noted. I think that we are, our committee is trying to figure that out. There is a realtor amongst us, not here today, who came from Wall Street. I won't mention his name because I don't know if he wants it out there yet or not. But he came from Wall Street and has been trading heavily in Bitcoin. So, and he's fascinating to talk to. So we're trying to see if he can come sometime in June and present to us. All right, let me just look through My questions here, you guys look at your questions very quickly. Here's an interesting question. Do the super rich, I didn't write this question, do the super rich have a better chance at getting any type of visa?
EB5. But there's another visa category because, you know, I don't mean to tear down EB5, but it's, you know, it's a lot of money, it's going to go up, and it takes a while. But one thing I would like to mention, which is easier, less money, doesn't take a long time, but it depends what country you're from, is called the E2 treaty investor. And the United States has treaties with various countries around the world, about, I think, 60-something countries. I would say, I can't tell you exactly which. I do have those on my page, okay? But it's pretty much every European country has a treaty with the United States. Japan has a treaty with the United States. There's a few countries in South America and in the Middle East that have these treaties. And all the treaties say, it's a very vague area of the law, but we've been doing this for 30, 40 years, and we have not lost one of these E2 treaty investor cases. You have to invest a substantial amount of money, and the business can't be marginal. Well, what does that mean? In my mind, I always tell the people, invest a minimum of $100,000, and it's never failed us. I've seen other lawyers do a little bit less, but it makes me nervous. You know, I mean, we get a lot of our clients from referrals, and I don't want disappointed clients. I say, oh, 80,000. I said, no, go to somebody else if you have 80,000. Marginal means it can't be just providing jobs for your family. A lot of people used to do that. So I advise them at least 2 or 3 jobs for Americans to do that. So we send them to a company, we get a business plan, they invest the money, they rent out a building, and they get bless you, they get the E2 visas, and then some of the, bless you again, and then some of these people then go through the EB5 process while they're on the E2s. And one thing about the E2s is you can keep renewing them forever. So you never have to be a permanent resident of the U.S. And if I can indulge me, so I can just tell one story about this. So a few years ago, I got a call from a reporter on that wonderful paper, the National Enquirer, and he says, do you know Seal, the singer Seal? And thank God my son was a Seal fan, so I knew who he was. I couldn't tell you any of his songs, but I knew who he was. And he said, you know, do you know that he has like 5 cocaine convictions? Like, how can he get into the United States and do his concerts? Isn't that inadmissible, you know, non-welcoming thing? And I said, well, you know, I mean, I'm from the 60s. I said, well, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, they all had drug convictions. So what they do is they give them, they call it a waiver. They come here, they do their concerts, and they make millions of dollars for not only themselves, but people in the U.S., and then they got to get out. Simple, right? And then he said something very unexpected, because at that time, any of you who know Seal, he was married to the top fashion model in the world, Heidi Klum, at that time. He said, well, if they just have to get out after their concerts, how come he just bought a $15 million home in Beverly Hills? And I said, wait, you know, don't quote me on anything. Let me think about that. And it hit me that even though he could never get a green card in the U.S., you can get waivers of almost everything except murder, maybe, for a temporary visa. So I said, I bet he had an E2 visa because he's from Britain. And we went over, somehow this guy got a picture of what the visa and the passport, and I turned out to be a good guess on my part. He did have an E2 visa. So I actually have clients who have had these visas. I've only been practicing 40 years. Some of them have had it for 50 years, and their tax attorneys are saying, you know, we don't even want to get them green cards. We just want to keep them on the E2s. But then I have a whole class of other clients who do want the EB5 visas, But since it takes too long, they get the E2 visas, come here, start a business, and then invest the $500,000 into a regional center or expand their business, and then they get a green card.
But why does that have to be, or why did that come on the coattail of my question of the super rich? If it's $100,000 versus 500, which is now going to go up to 800.
Yeah, because you could be a billionaire, but if you don't have the relatives to sponsor you in the U.S., and you're not going to work for somebody else. Hey, I'm a billionaire. I'm not going to work as a lawyer or architect or some job where I get sponsored. I have to go through the EB-5 to get, for an investment. If I'm Chinese, it's going to take 4 or 5 years to do that. I want my kids to get green cards and come over here. So Chinese, unfortunately, there is no E2 treaty between U.S. and China. But a lot of other people, they think, okay, E2 will get me here in a couple of months. EB-5 may take a couple of years. So I'll come over. I want to come over right away. I'll come over on the E2, and then I'll have you transition me to a green card on EB-5.
Okay, and then why you're surprised when Seal bought a $15 million house? I mean, you can buy it and not live here. Well,
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm in the right group. I mean, how many of you have had clients who buy a $15 million house and say, well, we're just going to lease it out? Does that happen?
But on their visitor visa, couldn't they live there for, I mean, what is the length stay of a visitor visa?
6 months.
Okay.
And actually from Britain, for most of the European countries, they all call it ESTA, but ESTA, but we call it the Visa Waiver Program. So if you're from a country that doesn't have a lot of people that are coming on visitor visas and overstaying in the U.S., in other words, not a third world country, then you get to come to the U.S. without a visa. That's why they call it visa waiver, but it's only for 90 days. And if you come too much, the guy at the airport will say, well, wait a second, you've come twice this year already. We're going to turn you around and send you back.
Even if the cumulative time is less than 90 days?
Right. If they see you coming over constantly, you come for 90 days, you go back for 2 weeks, and you try to come back, they're going to be suspicious. Yeah.
But the other visa, visitor visa for 6 months, I mean, if someone's wealthy enough and we want to represent these people and have them buy homes, there's no harm, no foul.
Right, but but you have to be. I think I was lucky. I got a good perspective on this. I always feel sorry for most of my colleagues who never worked for the government agency. I got to see it from the inside, and I met my wife there too, and she worked there for about 15 years, and she would work at the airports and so on. And now, when I see clients, we had a Chinese woman who was not my client. I just met her in Newport Beach one day. We just happened to be talking to each other. And then she was really an entrepreneur. And we would talk about, she was interested in the EB-5 visa, but she also had a boyfriend who was an American, and we were trying to decide. But I said, you're really coming to America too much as a tourist. You could get in trouble. And she left and came back, and guess what? At the airport, and this, you will be reading about this in the next year if you haven't yet, there's something called expedited removal. Usually, when you're in the U.S., somebody catches you, you're illegal, and they want to deport you. At the very least, you have a right to a hearing in front of an immigration judge, and you can bring an attorney and all that. Expedited removal was sort of intended for people at the border, but it also applies to people coming in at airports. So these officers who are not lawyers, my wife and a lot of people, my wife at least has a couple of college degrees, but a lot of her co-workers, they just got through high school and so on, and they're looking and they said it to my Chinese friend. They said, you're coming too much. We're going to give you an expedited removal. So she is back in China, and she can't get in for 5 years. And we had her boyfriend fly to China, he's an American citizen, and marry her, but she still needs a waiver. And the waiver's been in process for over a year, and she's still waiting.
And how long has this expedited removal been?
It bans you for 5 years.
No. When did it come to fruition? When did it start?
Oh.
Or is this under the current administration?
Well, so the expedited removal has actually been around since 1996, but the Bush and Obama administrations used it a little more sparingly. Now, I think President Trump has looked at the thing and said, my God, we can't really deport millions of people because we have 250, 300 judges in the U.S., and these judges, like in L.A., takes you 3 years to get a hearing before a judge. So I just talked to one of my friends last night. She's like my little sister. We used to be prosecutors together for the Immigration Service, and she's retiring next week. She said, I've had it. This is crazy, the caseload, all that. So the administration has to come to terms, and I think they are. You just can't deport that many people because they have rights to hearings, except if they're coming in at an airport or they're within 100 miles of a border and they haven't been here more than a certain amount of time. You can just have an officer say, you are gone, and you come back within 5 years and we can criminally lock you up. So that's going to expand tremendously.
So not send you back, but actually lock you up?
They can lock you up too, but usually you're in jail overnight and then you're across the border.
All right. Well, on that very depressing note, Debbie, do you have anything with your global transaction experience? I know you've done a lot of transactions with Japanese clients.
They're mainly all cash buyers.
And are they mainly, is it mainly the sell side, the buy side?
They're mainly the buy side.
Okay.
Yeah. Seller side, a few here and there. But they mainly have put their vestings into an LLC.
Which complicates things a little bit.
Makes it easier for no withholding.
Okay. And any horror stories or positive stories, one of each that you could share?
No, they're actually pretty easy to deal with, actually, for all cash, because it's not something, except for now we have that new over $2 million cash. If it's an all cash buyer over $2 million, they're taking title in an entity. There's forms that you have to fill out, which are in the back now, that the title company requires because they're tracking the money to make sure it's coming from that person that actually is buying the property. So you can't have it from the buyer be John Smith and the wire come from Raul Hernandez. So.
And have you ever encountered anything that smelled like money laundering?
No, I have not.
Good.
Thankfully.
Anything else you'd like to share on global escrows?
The only thing I see, if they're not doing all cash, or the seller has to get something notarized to make sure that they're going to the American Embassy, they are usually 2 weeks out for an appointment. So that's something that you need to take into account for closing. Also, if they're notarizing a grant deed and the legal description is missing, the notary will reject notarizing, and it has to be a complete document, which is supposed to be that way anyways, but so that's something that I have seen before.
And so again, when you're dealing with foreign buyers, to set the expectation of a longer time frame with your local partner realtor on the other side.
Yes.
Anything that you'd like to add? A horror story and a positive story?
Sure.
Through horror stories, we learn what to avoid.
Well, I would say one of the most commonly asked questions I get from agents, I just had this happen over the weekend. An agent called, referred a buyer to me. They're Brazilian, boyfriend, girlfriend, domestic partners, but they live and work in the U.S. and have for like 5 or 6 years. But their visas are expired. They are not legally here anymore. So that is a situation. That's why it's so important to find out if your clients are here legally or not. And it doesn't mean they have to have a green card. It can be they're here on a work visa, and the visa, it used to be that the visa had to have 3 years left on it still. That's not the case anymore. It can have less than 3 years left on it. So it's important, that's an important thing to watch out for, because if they're not here legally, but they're earning income here and filing tax returns here on an ITIN, that's going to be a little more challenging to get a loan done for them. I'm not saying it's impossible. Sometimes we find lending with people that are not U.S. citizens or here legally, there are some gray areas, and sometimes those gray areas live in doing the purchase as an investment property, because now we don't have to prove ATR. So there's sometimes ways to get around things. So I would say don't assume it's a no-go, but just know that if somebody is not here legally, but they're earning their income here and living here, that's going to be a little more challenging. Now, if they're here legally on a visa or however they may be here, and they're earning income here and they have been for 2 years, that's going to be a very straightforward transaction. Or if they're just a foreigner that earn their income overseas and they want to buy a second home here or an investment property, that is typically a very straightforward transaction. Where it gets a little trickier and where I think you want to definitely make sure they talk to a lender and not spin their wheels too much is for those people that are earning income here, filing tax returns here, but are not here legally. That's the trickier scenario.
That was your first scenario that you were. That was your first
That was
scenario.
the one, yeah, that's one that I would say you just want to have, it's a little bit of a flag, and you want to make sure before you spend too much time with this client.
And Carl, real quick, is that not or could it not be a red flag to immigration if someone is not here legally and they're trying to purchase a property and they have a wire transfer, et cetera, et cetera? Does that, would you not have to be relatively brave to do that?
Actually, that would not go on immigration's radar, so that would not trigger it. It's mostly, people, they're applying for jobs and they give phony papers, and now there's a computer system called an E-Verify system. I just had somebody from a South Asian country yesterday, works for a big company, and he's on E-Verify, and his papers are just not good. It's not good, so we're trying to stall off the inevitable because he's going to marry an American citizen in a few months, but that's where you get on the radar.
Okay.
I'd like to actually, can I share one more thing?
Sure, please.
With anybody that is purchasing a foreigner who's buying here, meaning they're not residing here legally, they're going to have a background check done. And usually it happens at the same time as the file is being underwritten. It takes about 3 to 5 business days. And so just know, again, about setting expectations. Stuff can pop up there. Or when they're seasoning the money, we had a transaction where the money was coming from Turkey, but then when they did the background and they went further back on the money, it turned out that the money had ties to Iran. So that deal blew up because of the ties to Iran. So I have one funny story, though. I do. I had a client, this was actually one of Nick's clients at Engel and Bokers. We had a client, he was married to a U.S. citizen. He was here legally, working in the U.S., filed U.S. tax returns, but he was Italian. His citizenship was in Italy. And we were doing his deal. It all appeared very straightforward initially because, like I said, he was here legally, filing U.S. tax returns for several years. And then it turns out, through the underwriting process, we find out that he was married before in Italy. So, as you all know, when you have someone that's divorced, or legally separated, we have to provide the divorce decree or the legal separation agreement that determines division of assets, debt, and income. So we say to him, okay, well, we're going to need a copy of your divorce decree from Italy. And he goes, well, I don't have that. We're like, well, what do you mean you don't have that? You're like they were engaged at the time. You're about to get married to this girl. And he said, well, in Italy, they make you wait 5 years from when you file for divorce to finalizing the divorce. It's not 6 months like here in the U.S. It's a 5-year process. So we're all looking at each other like, what are we going to do now? So, they really wanted this home, and we all worked together. He had to fly back to Italy, and we had to have his wife in Italy sign at the U.S. Embassy a legal separation agreement that basically addressed alimony, child support, assets, all that stuff. I think he actually had to bribe her to do it. because she was not happy. But I think he had to like give her money. I don't know what he had to do in Italy, but she was a bit reluctant, we'll just say. So that's just an example, though. We did end up closing the deal, but obviously escrow didn't close on time. That wasn't a 30-day escrow. You had to fly back to Italy. She lived like 3 hours away from the nearest U.S. embassy. So it was like a production, and we did get it closed in the end. But that's just, again, when you're dealing with borrowers from other countries, you have to know this is not going to be your like no contingency 30-day, you can't do that with these borrowers.
And so do they have to wait 5 years to get married here in the U.S.?
That's a great question. I don't know
I'm curious.
Do you know the answer to that legally?
We always have, if a divorce is required, we just have them file the divorce here, not on, or some of the people actually end up in Vegas where you can get it in 6 weeks.
But if the marriage was in Italy,
Yeah, it
how
doesn't-
can they file for the divorce here?
Because they're living here.
Oh, okay. All right, well, we learn everything here in our global presentations. All right, so I think now, unless anybody on the panel has anything more they'd like to add, we're going to open it up to questions. David? All right, please, don't be shy. Everybody ask questions. We have time.
I have one for Carl. You said some changes may be happening with EB-5 in October. Is anything going to change about the 10-job rule, either more jobs, less jobs required?
So there have been a number of bills proposed. So the two area, I don't think anything's going to happen with the 10 jobs. I think it's going to stay the same. I think the two things that are going to happen is the minimum amounts will be raised, and there'll be a federal agency to draw the districts so that they're not able to take these business districts like downtown LA and pretend it's high unemployment.
Okay, thanks.
I also have a question for Carl. What are the specific distinctions between the E2 visa and the EB-5 besides the minimum monetary amount that's required?
So there's not a 10-worker requirement. Like I said, it just says it's not marginal, meaning you can't have a business just employing your own family that you're bringing over. I advise people to have like 2 or 3 American workers. Also, the EB-5, since most people invest in regional centers, if you have a lot of money, you can just lay out on the beach here in Redondo and never have anything to do with the business. But for the E2s, you must be running the business.
Got it. And how long is the E2 visa good for?
Initially, it's good for 2 years, but after a while, you can get 5-year increments. Some of it depends on the country that you're from and how they treat you as investors.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. My client wife lives in U.S. as a green card holder. Husband is in another country, but they are married, but he's not a green card holder or anything like that, but they want to purchase home in U.S. If that's the case, is there any problem with the escrow?
Are they doing financing or are they buying all cash?
Financing, 20% financing.
Well, is the husband going to go on title or is
Yes, husband's going to go on title.
but not on the loan? Because we can do that with where the husband can be on title but not on the loan. That would be something more of the lender to prove. They get assigned quickly.
So somebody in that situation, and that's not an uncommon situation, they fall under the government's ability to repay guideline, which means the bank has to do their due diligence. So in that case, we just have to be able to show that income that he earns, if it's from a foreign country, again, it's back to we either get tax returns if they have the equivalent of tax returns in that country, or a CPA letter. Like I think in China they have an end of year kind of like reconciliation of income form they get, and it's not a tax return, but it is something they get that shows their annual income. So we would just have to show the source of income for them to qualify for that 20% financing, and that shouldn't be a problem at all.
Okay, the next question is, the house that they're purchasing, would it be categorized as a primary residence or second home?
It wouldn't be well, it depends on where does she live in the
She
U.S.?
lives in
And where's the home they're buying?
Los Angeles.
So it wouldn't be considered a second home because she resides here. And it would be if she's going to move into it and it makes sense. So if she's living in a $2 million single family home and saying she's going to move into $1 million triplex, they're probably not going to believe that. They're going to want to do that as an investment property. But if it makes sense that she would move into the property, they can do it as a primary residence. The only difference with investment and second home purchase is like 5% more down and 0.25% hit to rate. So it's not that devastating of a difference. But yeah, I would say, and that is part of what they do in the background check. So for example, this is a perfect example of things that can happen. Say her husband tries to say he's buying it alone as a second home, right? Because he's not a citizen here. He makes his money overseas to get that better rate and the lower down. When they do that background check I was talking about, they will find that he's married to somebody here in the U.S. That's part of the stuff they look for. And then they would go, buddy, you have a wife here. You have ties to the U.S. This isn't a second home. Your wife lives in L.A., so they might say you got to do this as an investment property. So that is a perfect example of something that I've seen people try to get away with, like, oh, I won't say, but they find it in the background check. They find any relations or ties you have in the U.S.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is because my client was shopped around for the loan, and one of the loan officers told her that this has to be second home. On the pre-qual letter, it was stated as a second home because he lives outside of the United States. So
I can't speak to what that, I mean, I can't speak. I can tell you that wouldn't be the way we would do it, but I don't know who this loan officer is and what company they're with. Yeah. Because they'll do the background check and they'll see that his wife lives in LA and he has ties here. So I would say they're going to have to do it as an investment, if it were my opinion.
Treat it as an investment.
Correct. Or primary, if she's going to move into the home, that might be considered as well.
Yeah, no, this is a house that she is going to live in that house.
Okay.
Why can't he sign a quitclaim deed?
Well, that's a good question.
She'd take title by herself. Would she qualify?
Yeah, they need his. I kind of assumed she wasn't the income earner.
So that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's.
David, this gentleman has a question.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I have a question on the EB5. Can you guys hear me? If the investment is coming in as a partnership and not a single person, does the minimum increase based on how many partners are investing in the business?
So it applies to the individual. So whatever the minimum is amount, whether it's $1 million or $500,000, would be for each partner.
Okay, so if there's multiple partners and some are foreigners and some are U.S. citizens, each one would have to go based on what their needs are.
Right. So you have to be really careful because you can't say, oh, well, I have these 2 citizen partners and I'm investing $500,000 or $1 million and we have 15 people. No, if you're equal partners, that's 5 workers attributable to each partner. So you have to get up to 10. So you'd need 30 people in that case.
Okay, and I have another question about DACA.
Sure. Does everybody, that's deferred action for childhood arrivals. That is the thing that Congress cannot seem to get together on, all these 800,000 kids. But go right ahead.
I have a client that's looking to buy, but she's under DACA, and so I know there's a lot of complications, and I was reading on Google on how to help her, but I was wondering if you had some input.
Yeah, so in general, Congress is going to have to take action, but there are certain individuals that are able to go from DACA to green cards. I've had a couple blog pieces about this a couple of years ago. So a lot of people on DACA, I would say the majority of people have come from the southern border to the U.S. Not all, but over 50%. And they've come with a coyote. They've come with some guy they pay. They don't come with a visa to the United States. I do a lot of free legal clinics over at my alma mater over at UCLA, and so DACA kids are like every second person that comes to see me. And what I told them a couple years ago, we'll see whether this has any resonance in the future, but hopefully some people took my advice on this. DACA has 3 criteria that will let you travel abroad. They call that an advance parole. It sounds criminal, but that's what immigration calls it. So you can either go abroad because of education reasons. Like when I was in college, I did education abroad in Europe. So I'm very close to the education abroad people at UCLA, and I tell each of the DACA students, sign up and just go somewhere for a few months and get that advance parole because they'll always grant it. You could also have employment abroad, so you're working for some international company or something and they want to station you abroad. And most frequently for humanitarian circumstances. I'll say, you've been here since you were 3 years old. Have you ever seen your grandmother? No, I haven't. Well, she's 70, whatever, and she's in ill health. I said, get a letter from her doctor and see if you can get permission to go visit her and come back. Because when you have a legal entry back into the U.S., even on advance parole, and then you marry your boyfriend or girlfriend, then you can get a green card without leaving the United States. Because these DACA kids all have to be undocumented to get DACA. And in the 96 law, they said if you've been undocumented for over a year and you leave, like to get a green card through your husband or wife, can't come back for 10 years. So you're between a rock and a hard place. So a lot of those DACA people have done that and then married their boyfriend or girlfriend. One other thing on DACA, the only reason DACA is still in existence is there's 2 courts, one on the West Coast and one in New York, where when the Trump administration in last September gave 180 days to get rid of DACA, the judges said they didn't do it for the right reasons and they have to litigate this. This morning, I woke up, because like I told you before, immigration's this changing game. And there was another decision from a D.C. district court judge. So this is the 3rd one on DACA. But this judge said instead of just DACA continuing, there's over 1 million kids who are afraid to apply for DACA because they're giving all their info to the federal government. And, what if DACA ends one day and they all get deported? Yeah, and it ended. So this judge not only said DACA should continue like the other 2 judges, he said they have to accept new applications. So I think you're going to see that in the news, and at least in the next few days. But I don't know. Did I answer your question? Or?
I guess, is she able to buy or is she not?
Yeah, well, she's. I'll defer to Michelle and Debbie, but she's totally legal in the U.S. She's not a permanent resident, but she can keep renewing her DACA.
Yeah, I got asked this question, and the investors that I have say that is not one of their acceptable legal residencies that are recognized yet. So I haven't seen an investor that will accept DACA as a form of legal residency to loan for. But that could change. It's just right now, I don't know of an investor that is accepting DACA as legal residency. So we'll see what happens. Like with immigration, the lending guidelines change constantly. I mean, we get notifications on a weekly basis of changes to guidelines. So it's a moving target for us as well. But when I checked a couple weeks ago, was it for you? Yeah. Okay. So when I checked a couple weeks ago, they were like, no, we don't recognize that yet. Because they don't recognize all visas, by the way, either. Like the lenders have certain visas that they look at as sufficient for lending with. There are visas that they don't accept. So DACA is basically falling under one of those that are not yet accepted.
And DACA is very interesting because they're here illegally, but are able to work legally. So it's like
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as a Debbie, have you ever done a cash buyer with DACA or?
All cash buyer, there's no verification to see if they're here legally or not for on escrow or title.
Hi, thank you for your time. This is regarding E2 to Carl. So the individual who's going to apply for E2, you look at their citizenship or their residency. Let's say the guy is a resident of Canada, but a citizen of another country which there is no treaty with them.
Yeah, their citizenship.
Their citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And can I ask you a second question? Sure. Regarding the cash buyers, the way that we source the money for loans, are we doing the same thing for cash buyers? Did we add this?
If you're under the 2 million, no. If you're over the 2 million and you're buying in an entity, vesting for an LLC corporation, then we have to track the money. But if you're taking individual, we don't track the money. We don't, it does go through the Federal Reserve because everything's going through wire transfers. So the Federal Reserve is going to still do their background check that way that they do. But other than that, title and escrow don't verify that they're here legally or not.
So if I'm representing a drug dealer from Colombia, then they
well,
can
where's
buy
the money? It depends on how the money's going to get here.
The wire transfer, yeah.
the
Wire transfer, because it's going to go through the Federal Reserve.
Okay.
And they'll they can flag it and reject the wire. And
Okay,
then
got it.
with no money, I can't close.
Okay, so sourcing essentially, okay, got it. Wire transfer.
David, when you get a chance,
I just wanted to know on a permanent visa, how many, or do they still give those, or how hard is it to get a permanent visa these days?
So a permanent visa is, what is commonly known as a green card.
Right.
Right. And yes, there's about 1 million people each year that get green cards in the United States. Most of them are family-based. The great majority are family-based. Marriage accounts for 200,000 to 300,000 of those million people every year. And the rest are these other relative categories that are 226,000 a year. The people in the employment categories, it's 140,000. And I should mention, with these numbers, it's not like 140,000 people are getting green cards through the jobs, because it's counting their spouses and kids. So it's maybe 80,000 people. So, it's not, sometimes when my people on the other side who want to cut President Trump has endorsed a bill introduced, probably not coincidentally, by two Southern senators, Tom Cotton of Arkansas and David Perdue of Georgia, and they want to cut legal immigration in half, okay? And Tom Cotton has a press conference and he says, my God, we can't keep admitting so many people into the United States each year with green cards. But if you look at the percentages, it's less than 1/3 of 1% of the total U.S. population. And so it's not this overwhelming number. So the other ones, which I do have some agreement with the anti-immigrant people, but with a condition. So there is a visa lottery that started in the 1990s that gives 50,000 visas a year. I do not think that it's in the United States national interest just to have a lottery. So I would put those 50,000 in the employment and the investor categories, because that is in the U.S. national interest. And then there are a very small group of people who have got asylum or have come here as refugees, and they can convert to green cards every year.
So I just heard that green cards usually have to be renewed.
The card itself has to be renewed. I do have people that come to my office and like, oh, I lost, I'm not a permanent resident. I never renewed the card. And I go, well, no, you are still a permanent resident. You just can't prove it because you didn't renew your card. So yes, every 10 years you're supposed to renew it. But frankly, I advise people just naturalize and become an American citizen. Some people think, well, maybe I'll retire back in my own country. But now a lot of the countries, including Canada, which never used to do this, recognize dual nationality. And we have a place on our website where we talk about which countries recognize that and which don't. So become a citizen.
Because I had heard that somebody coming through the airport through customs, and they had, like from way back, the permanent card, green card, and the custom agent said to them, oh, you have the good one. You have the forever right to live here or something.
See,
so that's why I was wondering if there's a difference in that some don't ever have to be renewed.
Yeah, so I think that sort of proves what I say about the guys at the airport and why, giving them the power to expeditiously remove somebody when they have very little knowledge. That's absolutely untrue. They passed a regulation a few years ago that says that they have to give up those permanent green cards and apply for one of the 10-year replacements. But a lot of the people haven't done that because they're kind of clueless about it. But it's kind of sad when the immigration officer at the airport is equally clueless.
So what would happen, like, if somebody hasn't done that and they come back, they, leave the country and come back?
So sometimes if they're, I'm not berating all of them. A lot of them, I know them, and they're nice people trying to do a good job. So if they take the card from them but stamp their passport, it's called an I-551 stamp, then they're okay to travel for a year in and out of the United States as if they had the card, and they should immediately apply for a replacement card.
Wow, okay, that's interesting, something new.
So a slight change of subject. Although that's very interesting, and my husband is from Zimbabwe, so we had to go through, I advise everybody, just hire a lawyer and not understand it yourself, just give them all the information and they'll take care of it. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So my question is with threefold, and it might be, I'm very interested in having a whole panel just on cryptocurrency in general. When they come to convert it, sometimes, so you talked about converting it. I've done some research in it. When should we advise clients to convert the Bitcoin, because the rate changes so quickly and so drastically? If they're trying to convert and get approved for a certain amount and they're getting approved based off a certain conversion rate, do you recommend them converting it at the early stage of their buying process, or closer to making offers, like right after escrow? What would be your recommendation on that?
That's a very tricky question, because we can't really tell a client when to convert. Obviously, it's changing value so drastically. Could you imagine if you insisted that your client convert and then it goes up 20% in value a week later? And, I think that's a tricky question. I would say I wouldn't want to be the person advising my client when to convert, because obviously they could end up not wanting to be a client anymore if you advised improperly. I would say that is a tricky question, because we need to establish a value of that currency to pre-approve them for the loan. Yet, I have heard of that case in Manhattan Beach where, because escrow was delayed, they didn't convert till the very end, and it was like he was able to buy a boat and other stuff because it went up so much in value just during the escrow duration from what it was at the opening of escrow versus the close. So I would say if it were me, I would probably take a very conservative conversion rate on the Bitcoin to pre-approve them. Maybe look at the lowest it's been in the last 6 months or something and use that. And then obviously with somebody like that, you'd want to make sure you have a loan contingency. So if the floor fell out from under them right as they go to convert and now they can't qualify anymore, they don't lose their good faith deposit. That's what I would do. So I would just probably be conservative in pre-approving them and then making sure that that's not somebody that you put into contract with no contingency of any kind where they're at risk from day one. And then it's up to the client. It's their money. It's even with foreign buyers, you know, that are bringing money from other countries that are fairly stable conversion rates. It's still their decision on to when they want to make that conversion, you know.
But I would at least make the recommendation, not a recommendation, but just state, in case they don't know, but my guess is if they're dealing in cryptocurrency, they are acutely aware. But, you know, just to say, be advised that, as you know, the rates are changing, so make your decision wisely.
Yeah.
But again, I would think that there are no novices that are dealing in cryptocurrency.
And I would also say it depends on the entire scenario of the person. Like if your client has
I take it back.
other funds that can cover a delta should the value decrease, then maybe with that client they can be a little riskier on when they do the conversion. But if you're dealing with a client that all their cash to close is coming from the Bitcoin and they have no other liquid funds available to them, that may be a client that you would advise, hey, you're in contract now, so you may want to consider locking that in so that you know you've got your funds to close.
Okay, and then to follow up with that, you talked about sourcing the funds. A lot of times people will trade Bitcoin to Bitcoin, or they'll purchase Bitcoin to Bitcoin in those markets. So how is Bitcoin sourced when it's in that world and it's been in that world and they can't necessarily trace it back to something because they were gifted it or they were awarded it or it was part of a transaction or something like that?
So any trading that happens, and I forget, it's called like block ledger. I forget the name of it right now off the top of my head, but there is these kind of the most widely used trading platform in cryptocurrency. There are a few others, but there's one that the majority of the people use. So that tracks every purchase, sale, movement. So every single Bitcoin has to be tracked on its origin. So if they bought more if they bought cryptocurrency from somebody else in that world, it'll be on that trading ledger. But if they were gifted or they mined or anything outside that can't be tracked, bye-bye. It can't be used. The whole account is...
If it's gifted, though, and then you'd have to go back to that person who gifted it and trace their source of it.
Yeah, and that would be a gift then. And then we're into, are they a relative? Is it somebody that can gift? Is it a parent, a sibling, an uncle, aunt, spouse, domestic partner? Because if it's just somebody, a friend that gifted, that's not an allowable gift.
Okay. And then this is the third part of the question, just to cover the whole cryptocurrency field in a short period of time. Aside from just Bitcoin alone, but the technology behind it, the blockchain technology, which you kind of alluded to, where do you guys see real estate going, and even the legal field in a sense? I'm sure it can apply there too, in expediting escrow and expediting the process of approving funds. And I've also heard of cryptocurrency to cryptocurrency lending and cryptocurrency backed lending. So there's a huge field out there that has yet to be tapped into the real estate market. Do you guys have any knowledge of the future of how it's going to be involved in real estate?
I have no knowledge of cryptocurrency banks or cryptocurrency lending. I would say I don't see the traditional banking environment changing, that it's basically going to be looked at the same as any foreign money. It will have to be converted to US dollars, and it will have to be seasoned and sourced where it originated from, just like if money was coming from China or Australia or any other foreign currency. I don't really see that changing because that's just our policy. We season all funds in a real estate transaction. I know nothing about cryptocurrency lending, though. I have no idea about that. Yeah, I have no knowledge about that.
Not a lender involved, the seller can pay out, or the buyer can pay outside of escrow directly to the seller, and that could be something that you could put into the instructions that's saying that buyer's going to pay directly to the seller the Bitcoin value of this. Of course, there's going to be a release clause in there for me. So that would be an option if you're doing it all cash, because then the lender's not involved to see that.
I had a kind of a comment question. I had a situation where I have a USA citizen who owns a LLC, but he owns a lot of property and he has a Persian background. But everyone who applies to rent in our buildings has to have perfect credit. And he ran the credit on an applicant, and she didn't work in the U.S., but her money comes from Iran, and she's an Iran citizen. And so he at first said, no, it's too complicated, I'm not going there. And but they pursued it, and they were very cordial. And my owner ended up meeting with her privately, and they felt simpatico, and they worked it out. You can take advance money from someone to feel better about taking them. So the CAR rule is that if you're going to take advance funds, it has to be 6 months. It can't be 4 or 5. It's a 6-month advance payment on rentals, and you're allowed the standard security agreements. But anyway, we were able to work it out. But I was wondering, because we've talked so much about purchases, but we do have occasions where people are working to lease, and we have unique things that come up that we think we know something about, but we really don't know anything about it. So I hope that I haven't done anything wrong, but I always call Car Legal, and I get their latest support on whatever I'm doing, and they are very helpful. I just wanted to bring that to people's attention about deposit money for renters.
I know we have one more question back here.
I have a client, they are citizen here, and they have multiple properties in foreign country, and some they have inherited some properties. They are renting right now, and they wanted to bring the money in the country. What is the best way to do it? Or should the money go directly or wired to escrow, or should they put their money in the account here and then deposit in the escrow later?
I can talk about the financing side.
It may not be all cash.
Okay, so financing.
They will finance here rest of the money. They may put down 50–60%, but rest of the money they will finance. So the question is, basically I'm looking at from tax consequences, is that they still have to pay taxes because they're bringing money from outside the country? Is that, or they don't have to pay
that's a tax question. I can tell you from a lending side if this will help them make a decision as to how to do that. If they wire the money, if they wait to sell if the property sells just before the escrow is closing here, we're going to need to see documentation of the sale of that piece of real estate, where the money came from. If they sell the property in advance and they wire the money to their U.S. bank account, as long as the money is seasoned for over 60 days in their U.S. bank account, we're not going to go back beyond that with a U.S. citizen buying here in the U.S. So if they sold the property and wire the money immediately, and we have 2 bank statements to just show the money has always been there, we're not going to ask to see any of that documentation about the sale of that property. But if they sell and then wire it immediately, then we're going to have to get into documenting everything about that other property that they sold. So if that helps them, how much paperwork they want to have to get into, translating of documents, that may influence the timing of how they do things.
Okay, they are actually in process of selling. So that's why I was asking question. This is the right timing. What is the best way to do it?
To minimize paperwork and documenting of things to the U.S. lender, the sooner they get the money here and can let it season for 60 days, it will minimize a lot of extra paperwork. But it can still be done if they find something right away and they don't have those 60 days of seasoning. It can all be done. It's just going to be a greater effort on their part.
Okay. I think they're just worried about, do they have to pay taxes or not, because they would not know how much money they will end up getting it. Inheritance, I have heard, I'm not sure what your experience is, they don't have to pay taxes on inheritance. Is that, anybody has experienced that? Or do you have to pay taxes on inheritance money?
That's a CPA question.
No, I'm just wondering if
I think it depends on the amount, at least in the U.S. Okay. I think there's an exemption up to a certain amount, depending on how. I don't know how to answer that.
If you have a foreign buyer from an easy country, say England, and do they need to move their money to a U.S. bank for you, or can they leave it in the English bank, and then when it's time to close escrow, you can move it?
They can leave it in the English bank, and that example would be quite easy because England has pretty typical bank statements like we do here, and they're in English. So those are easier. But if it was in a different language, we'd want to have some time to get those bank statements, translated if we needed to. And just back to the whole conversion rate when they want to move that money and convert it. No, we can have it. We can show the seasoning of the bank in the country where it's at. And we can also get gift money from overseas banks as well, as long as it can be. With gift money, we have to show 1 month seasoning of the funds, and that account may or may not have to be translated depending on the country it's coming from.
That's on the lending side, but some different title companies, their requirements, whether they can accept from the international bank account or not. You can. Yeah, in the past I've run into a title company that wouldn't allow it. We had to change title company.
Sorry.
Debbie, I have a question. When the wire comes in, can it come in, like that example, England, can it come in that currency, or does it already have to have been converted to U.S.? It converts as it's, okay.
Okay, one more question I have. I have another client. He wants to invest here. He's a foreigner. He wants to buy a property. He prefers to put down 40 to 50% down. Question is, can he get loan? And if he has to get a loan, lender has to be in U.S. or the foreign country for rest of the money.
I'm sorry, he's a foreigner.
Yes.
And where does he work and make his money?
He's a foreigner.
So yeah, he can buy that as a second home, and he could get financing through his own bank, and that would be an all-cash deal because the financing would happen against probably collateral he has back in his home country. But if he wanted to put the collateral against the property here, I'm pretty sure that would have to be a U.S. bank that did that. And he would just buy it as a second home. He'd have to put 35% down, and we would just source his income from his country. So all of that is fine. There's no problem with that.
Do you have any list of lenders who would do that in U.S.?
Yeah, I do it at RPM. We have our banks do that.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we do that.
Thank you.
And by the way, there are people that don't know, like our bank, for example, the lenders we use for foreign buyers, we only require 12 months reserves for that purchase. A lot of the foreign banks that do lending here are much more stringent. Like I've heard some foreign banks require 5 years of reserves, or they'll require you to have a very, very big deposit with them in an account. So like for us, we require 12 months reserves, and it can be in any institution. It doesn't have to be held in our institution, where a lot of the foreign banks require 5-year reserves. The money has to be held in an account with them. So it's worth foreign buyers talking to a U.S. bank, because it may be much more lenient than the foreign bank's requirements.
Thank you.
I don't know about the title company accepting foreign deed of trust.
I think when it's a foreign bank, they have to have branches in the U.S. I think. I don't, I've never seen or heard of it being financed from, because some of them have branches here, right? So, yeah, I don't know exactly.
We have a question here.
I have a client who is from Mexico, and he's been here for over 18 years, but he's still not legal, and he has about $350,000 money. It could trace. However, he's trying to buy a house, and he tried to get loan, the regular loan, but he couldn't get it because of a status.
Where does he earn his income?
Actually, that fund came from that accident he involved, and he got compensation. So that.
Well, where does he make his income? Like, how does he earn a living?
Here.
And does he file like tax returns on an ITIN
He doesn't
number?
have a social security number, but he has some kind of ID that do pay tax, but it's not still illegal.
Yeah, that's one of those more challenging buyers.
Okay.
May not be able to get that would be a client that I would say have him call me, and we can see if there's a way to qualify him buying it as an investment property. But he has to have some kind of legal, if he's earning his income here and filing U.S. tax returns, he has to have some kind of legal residency to be here, because they have to know that he can continue to earn here, that he's not going to be deported tomorrow and now we've lost the ability to repay.
Yeah,
it's kind of the part of being able to prove that he has the ability to repay the loan. So
4 kids.
yeah, if he doesn't have legal residence here, that's probably not going to happen for him. He'll have to probably be like an all cash buyer.
Or a hard money. Even hard money wouldn't do it.
I've never done a hard money for an illegal resident, but that's not a question I've ever asked them. I would have to ask that question and see.
But he still could buy home legally, or?
Yeah, he can buy, right, Debbie? All cash?
Uh-huh. Okay. But is it legal him to buy a house? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I don't need the mic. I'm pretty loud.
That's okay.
My question is regarding EB5. I have a client that owns quite a bit of multifamily residence here in Los Angeles. He does employ more than 10 people. The 10 people, it can't be full-time employee. They can convert them into full-time.
10 full-time. Yeah.
10 full-times. Would he be qualified for EB5?
And he's putting $1 million into the business?
assets worth more than over 20.
Sounds like he would qualify for that. I mean, they have to source the money and do the regular stuff, but sure.
Okay, second question. If all the properties owned in a partnership and he's one of the partner, let's say he owns 50%, they do employ over 20 people full-time.
Right. So if they do 20 people, then 10 of those jobs could be attributable to him, and he'd qualify for EB-5.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
I'll use the microphone. So the E2 and EB-5 investors, for those of us that have business or investment opportunities, how would we find clients like that? Because if they're going to need to invest and we have some opportunities, that would be something good to pursue.
You know, I was thinking about that. So, you know, like I said, I've been speaking here for quite a few years, and I have a monthly newsletter that I try to inform. My business plan for 30 years has always been put out, you know, as much information you can for immigrants and their employers and whatever. And if a fraction of 1% become my clients, then it's win-win for both of us. So, you know, listening to a lot of these questions that Michelle and Debbie have been talking about, you know, it's not, obviously it's not in my expertise as an immigration attorney, but I would invite your group, if you'd like to contribute some articles to our newsletter or something that I could post on my site, it may be a win-win. I mean, I might get some business and you may get, you know, because we have 60,000 mostly foreign-born people and then a lot of immigration lawyers too who subscribe to my newsletter. So if they can see your names and all the rest and what you do and there's valuable information. I haven't seen this on any immigration attorney's website. So you know, please approach me if you know, if you want to write an article and have me post it on the site. I'd be glad to do that.
Okay. That's a great opportunity. I was thinking a business broker too.
Exactly, yeah. If you have a business opportunity or investment in a business that already has the number of jobs that they need to create, it's already built in, and they don't have to decide what they're going to do.
I know a business broker that he says a lot of his clients are foreigners that are trying to get that visa, and they come to him looking for business opportunities. So maybe if you tell business brokers about your opportunity, that would be another one he has on his list to offer.
I get an email from somebody in LA all the time, a real estate agent, and I'm exposing my ignorance here for the last year. And there's a supermarket in LA for sale, and he says, tell all your EB-5 clients this supermarket is for sale. Swear to God, I had no idea what EB-5 was. I feel like such an idiot, but I had no idea what EB-5 was. But I've been getting this email for, I swear, a year. There's a supermarket for sale in LA.
Now you know.
Now I know what it is. Maybe the next time I get his email, I'm thinking maybe.
We have another question.
Yeah, this question is for Escrow. A foreign buyer, let's say the buyer's from China, they buy a property. It's I guess it's they bought all cash, and when they sell this property, can they wait? They don't have a social security number, and is it subject to hold 15%
Actually,
of the funds to far
there's escrow company's discretion, and I did check with my company that I currently work with, and we will not close or disperse until the seller has applied and received his social security number. Because the liability.
I mean, what if he's a foreign person?
Yeah, he has to apply for a social security number. So, or he deeds it into an LLC or corporation.
But it's different from escrow because I have heard from escrow they will withhold 15% of the capital gain. You know, to the property they bought it for.
Yeah, I have a previous company. I've done the 3 and 1/3 for the franchise and 20% for IRS. Sorry.
It's good.
So it's at the escrow discretion.
Well, U.S. and China have a treaty. It's 15% for an investor to come and buy properties. Is that true, Carl? Do you know?
That's a tax question.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I don't know. So,
All right.
We should have had a CPA on the panel.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Quick question. If someone doesn't live here, doesn't want to get a visa, doesn't want to come here, but they want to have a presence so they can have a money transfer and buy a property here, let's say all cash, is that doable? I mean, can they do that?
Sure.
And what entity do they have to create here? Nothing? I mean, they just open an account here as a foreign national from overseas?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of foreign nationals that you'd be surprised how many companies are, owned by foreign nationals locally or individual. Yeah.
It doesn't have to open an LLC or anything. As an individual, they can open an account here. Is that correct? A bank.
Yeah. I mean,
Would they,
yeah.
If it was going to be all cash, I mean, I know you're the lending side, do they have to have a bank account, or can the money just be wired and converted into dollars into escrow?
yeah, it could just be wired from the international bank. Yeah.
Right, so they don't necessarily have to have a U.S. bank account. I mean, it might be easier to pay property taxes and stuff like that, but you don't have to. An individual can buy a property here.
And they can get financing if they want to also, buying it as an investment property or a second home, being a citizen of another country, that's all very doable.
That's
They don't
that's
have
basic
to-
stuff.
If their income is earned in another country and they're legal citizens of another country, we can do loans for them all day long. They don't have to have any type of legal residency in the U.S. of any kind.
And the documents can be signed at the U.S. Embassy?
Yes, they can.
So the trick is when somebody like a foreign person buys here, the trick is when they try to sell the property, that's when they have an issue because they have to apply for a social security number to sell their property. But you don't have to have a visa, you don't have to be a citizen or anything like that to purchase in the United States. All cash. But the people that are here and living here paying taxes can't buy a property.
Unless they're here legally, because,
There's any
just
minute.
so you know why, is because those people fall under the federal guideline of having to prove ability to repay. And so, if you're telling a lender, I work here, all my income is derived from a job in the U.S., yet I'm not here legally, and I can be deported and lose my job.
Therefore, can't pay for the loan.
Therefore, the lender cannot prove to the government that they proved your ability to repay on that loan. That's why if you're working here, making income here, filing taxes here on an ITIN or whatever, if you're not here legally, that's why there's a problem there, is because they cannot be assured that you will be able to remain in that employment. So now how do you repay that loan?
You have to remember that the bank, when you have a loan, is your equity partner. And would you, as an individual, invest in someone who at any moment could lose all of their livelihood and have to be deported?
I understand that, but if a foreign person that have completely different legal ramifications in their country buy something here, and she was just saying that they could even get a loan through the United States, and they basically default on their house and they can't pay, how are they going to be responsible to pay for a loan and they're in a completely different country? You can't get to them; they have different laws. So how does that apply?
Well, in those cases, we are still verifying their income over there. So it's
Not like they get a loan. That's another big mistake actually realtors make, is they'll tell their foreign buyers that it's a no-doc loan. That is totally untrue. They're still going to have to prove 2 years of income history. They don't have to prove it through our ways of proving it here. It's whatever there is normal in their country to prove income. So they will have to prove that they have a 2-year history of employment in the same line of work, that they make enough income to qualify to carry the property, and they have to be a legal citizen in their country, and they still run a background check. So if somebody in their country is a criminal, that person's not getting financing. But if they're an upstanding citizen in their country and
they have had a job, they've been in the same job, they file the equivalent of tax returns in their country, and they can show alternative credit, that they have good history with creditors back in their country, then the U.S. bank feels like that is a secure equity partner, so to speak. So yeah, they're still doing due diligence. I didn't want to give you the impression that those people from other countries can just come and do a no-doc loan and not have to prove. They still have to prove all those things. Unless it's a cash. That's...
Awesome questions. I think we have one last question here.
What I heard is that a foreigner he can invest in the properties here, but in order to sell it, that investor has to have a Social Security number, and it is not easy to get a Social Security. So is it possible that if that investor has any relative here, and that relative adds on the title, so at least one of the person has now Social Security, can they sell at that time property? And the other will take the quit claim.
Yeah, so the other seller that has no social is not going to be a seller anymore.
There'd be a high level of trust in that regard.
Well, it's a relative, okay, so they have to have a trust among themselves. So then it is doable. Then foreign investor quit claims it and then can sell the property.
Title company's probably going to want some more documentation of that seller quit claiming to whoever he's deeding to.
Okay.
Has this been helpful, everyone? Does it make you fearful of entering into these transactions, or does it make you feel confident? Because we always have to be cautious, but you know that we're here as a resource, and our panelists who have so graciously given us their time, if you have concerns, engage them. Hire them. Let them help you with these transactions. So don't try to wing it on your own. That's why we have these professional here. But I think, what was the number, Ben? The amount of dollar sales over the last year from NAR? Was it 157 billion? Billion. So, and remember, that's inbound, outbound, and local multicultural. So thank you all. Next time we will get our CPA on board as well. You know, everybody's busy, and it is tax time, so it's kind of hard to get people to come here at this time of year. And we will try to get this Bitcoin class as well, because it is a fascinating topic. All right, thank you all for coming. Don't forget CIPS.